The meeting will come to order. This morning we're going to be discussing the findings and recommendations that recently came out of the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. The commission was created by the bipartisan infrastructure law, taken from a bill sponsored by Senators Romney and Kelly. The 50-person commission was co-chaired by FEMA and the Departments of Agriculture and the Interior. Its directive was to recommend policies to improve federal forest and wildlife management. Over the course of a year, they examined everything from active forest management to contracts for firefighting aircraft and came up with 167 unanimous recommendations. We envy you on unanimous recommendations. We're going to focus on recommendations targeted at the federal land management agencies, and our witnesses represent a cross-section of the diverse topics explored by the commission. To set the scene, even though it's only March, we have already had record-breaking wildfires in the U.S. The Smokehouse Creek wildfire 2 weeks ago in Texas scorched more than 1 million acres, killing 2 people and destroying hundreds of homes. This was the largest wildfire in Texas history, and it happened in February. It literally snowed while the fire was still raging. This isn't and shouldn't be normal, but wildfires are now breaking records every year. The severity of these fires has also become a significant drain on the U.S. resources and our productivity, even beyond the devastating loss of life and property. For starters, U.S. spending on fire suppression has increased by 300% since the 1980s, even after accounting for inflation. Wildfires also slow down business and tourism and severely burn landscapes, filter less water, store less carbon, and transport more sediment to our streams and reservoirs. The National Institute of Standards and Technology attempted to quantify the economic impact of these fires in 2017 and found that the costs and losses could exceed $400 billion per year. I know that my colleagues on the committee, particularly those from western states, are all too familiar with these statistics and the terrible tragedies that accompany severe wildfire. Congress, however, has taken some action to get our forests back to a healthier condition. Between the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, federal land management agencies will receive over $24 billion. That's a lot of money. These laws also included some common sense reforms, like streamlining the permitting for fuel breaks near communities. They also provided the brave men and women serving as federal wildland firefighters with a temporary pay supplement to better reflect the critical but dangerous jobs that they perform. I want to thank all 50 members of the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission for their time and effort spent studying this issue and providing us with options to further improve our forest and wildfire management practices. Clearly, with 167 recommendations, you discovered plenty of issues, and your conversations generated plenty of ideas. Some of these were topics that our committee has covered in past hearings, or that have existing legislative proposals in Congress to address them. For example, the Commission noted that many areas with high fire risk are characterized by small diameter, low-value trees. Expanding the universe of wood products made from small diameter timber could radically expand the areas where thinning treatments are both necessary and profitable. A bill that I introduced with Ranking Member Barrasso last year, the America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act, would do just that. The Commission also noted the need to fix a problem related to firefighter retirement benefits that our committees has discussed before. Currently, if a firefighter takes a break of more than 3 days during a 20-year career, that firefighter gives up their special retirement benefits. Ranking Member Barrasso and I have worked on another bill together, the Promoting Effective Forest Management Act, which would fix this problem also. Bipartisan common sense solutions to these problems exist, and I look forward to hearing ideas from my colleagues on how we can address the recommendations from the Commission this morning. Since the Forest Service and the Department of Interior served as co-chairs of the panel, I am also interested to hear what administrative changes the agencies are considering as a result of these reports. The report drove home the need to return low-intensity fires in many areas, and I know the agencies conducted a record high number of prescribed burns last year. What's less clear is whether those burns were in areas with the highest wildfire risk. The Commission encouraged agencies to adopt region-specific prescribed fire targets to better track actual hazardous fuels reduction. Tucked in at the end of the wildfire report is a recommendation to overhaul the way that agencies report their treatment metrics and hopefully stop double or triple counting acres. Since these recommendations were unanimously adopted, I hope this means that the agencies finally accept that they need to provide more transparency on how appropriated dollars translate into on-the-ground work. So let me just thank our witnesses for being here today, as well as the Commission's coordinators for their work to make this happen. I look forward to hearing your perspectives on these issues. And with that, I'll turn to Ranking Member Barrasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this important hearing. Thank you to all the witnesses. As you said, Mr. Chairman, wildfires are devastating communities across America, and especially in the West. Wyoming is no exception. Just 12 days ago, the Happy Jack fire threatened homes and infrastructure in and around our state capital in Cheyenne. And as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, that fire was in February. I mean, this is very early for fire season. The fire serves as a sobering reminder that we are in a wildfire crisis, and the crisis isn't going to solve itself. Our federal forests are in dire need of effective management. In recent years, Wyoming and other western states have endured wildfires of unprecedented size and destructiveness. These wildfires are wreaking havoc on our forests and on our communities. So until we start to manage our forests properly, the crisis is going to continue to escalate. Forest Service estimates 278 million acres are at high or very high risk of wildfire. Mr. Chairman, this is an area more than 17 times the size of your home state of West Virginia. On average, more than 6 million acres burn each year. Federal costs to suppress these fires have exploded to well over $2.5 billion each year. Fire seasons are now longer, they're more destructive, and they're more expensive. As summer approaches, rural communities are again bracing for what will likely be another devastating wildfire season. This committee has had this discussion before, and every year it becomes more clear that we are on an unsustainable path. Can't just keep throwing more money and resources at the problem. We need to get back to the basics. Must start managing the forests in a serious and credible way. Need to increase the pace and the scale of our wildfire mitigation activities. That includes timber harvesting and hazardous fuel reduction. For years, officials for the Forest Service and the Department of Interior have testified that a paradigm shift is needed. In response, Congress has given both agencies billions of dollars in additional taxpayer funding. We still have not seen the agencies do sufficient work on the ground, what's needed to do to address the crisis. So today we are reviewing another congressionally mandated report on how to address wildfires. The report's about 350 pages long. It includes 148 recommendations. And while all of us here recognize the urgency of the problem, acting on nearly 150 recommendations is impractical, and it's not entirely helpful. To effectively address the wildfire crisis, we need to strengthen what is working well. That means eliminating red tape to expedite critical fire mitigation projects. The Forest Service and the Department of the Interior must make these efforts a priority. But they shouldn't try to do it alone. From recruiting and training firefighters to mitigation planning and project work, federal agencies truly need help. Federal agencies need to allow local communities, state agencies, and Indian tribes to help get this vital work done. We all need to work together. The Commission report shows that we should focus our time and resources on cross-boundary, locally led efforts to address wildfire risk. Now, I remain troubled that the Commission excluded representatives from my home state of Wyoming. Wyoming is a national leader in increasing the pace and the scale of good forest management, while at the same time increasing wildfire preparedness. This is exactly what the rest of the nation needs to do. The Biden administration is not just failing to effectively manage our nation's forests, they're actually pursuing what I believe are misguided nationwide mandates to prevent good management in old-growth forests. Instead of restricting responsible forest management, this administration should focus on how to get more management done across fire-prone lands. The Biden administration shouldn't delay or make it more difficult to do this crucial work. I'd like to welcome Kelly Norris, and I'll introduce her a little bit, Mr. Chairman, who is Wyoming State Forester, and as well as include all the witnesses today. Thanks very much for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony.
Thank you, Senator. And now we're going to go to Senator Cantwell for an introduction, and I'm going to come back to Senator Barrasso for his introduction, and I'll do the other three.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, and thank you, Ranking Member Barrasso, for holding this important hearing. And I want to thank the witnesses for participating. I want to introduce Executive Director of the Confederated Tribes of Colville Reservation, Cody DeChaltel, for being here. Thank you, Mr. DeChaltel. You're an expert in this particular area and have 2 decades of expertise on the forestry, wildfire preparedness, and mitigation. The Colville has faced some of the most brutal fires that we've had in the Northwest, losing, I heard on one account, almost $2 billion of timberland in one fire, but it's clearly been impacted in a major way. And you have, because of this, tried your own management practices with fire breaks and various issues I hope to hear about today. You're the Executive Director of the Confederated Tribes of Colville, but serve as the President of the Intertribal Timber Council, and before this served as tribal government on the natural resources for 8 years. Throughout his career, he's been an exceptional advocate to protect tribal natural resources and tribal cultures and economies. I think your tribe gets about 20% of your revenue from this timberland, so it's a very important issue for you economically. The Confederated Tribes are on the front lines of the crisis, as I mentioned, located in the northeast corner of our state, bordering the Okanagan and Wenatchee National Forests. This fire does not know jurisdictional boundaries. That's the issue. And so when it comes to working across jurisdictions, I think Mr. DeChaltel is going to tell us what that experience has been as part of Wildland fire management mitigation. And so I look forward to hearing those tools that you've deployed that you think have made you in those latter years since the big fire, not that there hasn't been many big fires, but since the big one in, I think, 2015, what you've successfully done that we could all learn from today. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Now we have Senator Barrasso for his introduction.
Well, thanks, and thank you also for Senator Cantwell. She and I were working together at a field hearing that we held a number of years ago in Washington State, taking a look at the commonalities and the points that you just made. So it's good to have all of those people here testifying. And I'm delighted to have with us today Kelly Norris, and she has testified previously before this committee. She is Wyoming's state forester. She's been in the position for nearly a year. Before that, she served as our interim state forester. She's a resident of Cheyenne, Wyoming. She has a degree in forestry from the University of Wisconsin. She's worked for the Wyoming State Forestry Division for 14 years. We're very fortunate to have her because she had experience working as a forester for both the state of Wyoming as well as the U.S. Forest Service. She has years' worth of critical on-the-ground knowledge and is a valuable resource to the community and to this committee. I'm grateful that you've taken the time and the responsibility to protect Wyoming's forests. Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And we have Ms. Meryl Harrell. She's Deputy Undersecretary for the Natural Resources and Environment at the Department of Agriculture. We have Ms. Joan Mooney, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy, Management, and Budget at the Department of Interior. And we have Ms. Madeline McDonald. She's a Senior Watershed Scientist at Denver Water. And now we'll start with your opening remarks, Ms. Harrell.
Thank you. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify about the important work of the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. I'd like to start by thanking Congress for establishing this commission. I served as one of the co-chair designees on behalf of Secretary Vilsack. It has been an honor to serve alongside my fellow commission members, each of whom brought unique knowledge, skills, perspective, and experience to this effort. And I want to recognize the many commission members, coordinators, staff, and subject matter experts who are here in this room today. For decades, the wildland fire crisis has been growing. Larger, more severe wildfires are devastating communities and ecosystems and threatening lives and livelihoods across the country. Public health impacts are increasing, along with harm from cascading disasters like floods and landslides. This is a challenge that crosses the natural and the built environment, from rural and urban communities to the lands that surround them. At the same time, fire is also a critical part of the solution to this challenge. Returning fire to the land, including through prescribed fire and cultural burning, is necessary to restore fire-adapted ecosystems and reduce risk to communities. Recognizing the urgency of this crisis, Congress, in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, directed the creation of the commission and charged it with developing a comprehensive set of recommendations within 1 year. The Commission's work was informed by ongoing strategies, including the Forest Service's Wildfire Risk Strategy, and by the work of leadership bodies like the Wildland Fire Leadership Council. Commission members considered every phase of the wildfire challenge, from pre-fire mitigation to response and post-fire recovery. The Commission also considered key enabling conditions, including the need for a comprehensive workforce, science, data, and technology, and the relationships and resources necessary to meet the societal challenge. Recognizing that Congress often hears divergent views, it was important for the 50 Commission members to come to consensus before moving any recommendations forward. The recommendations in the Commission's Aerial Equipment Strategy Report and the 148 recommendations in the Commission's final report reflect the consensus views of the Commission and received unanimous support. Addressing this complex problem requires an integrated set of solutions. The Commission highlighted the central importance of our workforce in its recommendations, including the need to invest in a comprehensive workforce, pay wildland firefighters what they deserve, and ensure they have the benefits they need, including for housing, mental and physical health, work-life balance, and retirement. We appreciate your action just in the last week to pass a budget that will extend supplemental pay increases for our wildland firefighters through the end of this fiscal year, and we stand ready to work with you to make pay increases permanent, as called for in the President's FY25 budget, and invest in the well-being of our entire fire workforce, as recommended by the Commission. The Commission's recommendations address systems, tools, and authorities needed to operate at scale. We focused on the role of partnerships, recognizing we need an all-hands, all-lands approach and that fires don't follow jurisdictional boundaries. Importantly, the Commission recognized the long history of Indigenous stewardship related to fire and emphasized the importance of Indigenous knowledge and stewardship into the future. Recommendations included increasing work with states, counties, local communities, and private landowners, expanding tribal co-stewardship and co-management, and increasing collaboration with industry, utilities, nonprofit, public health, and other partners. The Commission focused on community resilience as well, including investing in pre-fire planning and risk mitigation, increasing ignition resistance within the built environment, and increasing support for post-fire recovery. Members recognized that wildfire risk is not experienced equally and identified recommendations to help increase access to programs for communities that need them the most. And the Commission recommended sustained, predictable, and long-term investments at the scale needed for transformational change, building on the down payment provided through Bill and IRA. The Commission's recommendations are consistent with the priorities in the President's FY25 budget, including on topics such as firefighter pay, housing, and mental health. We are in action right now on many fronts to advance work in the wildfire space while laying the groundwork for further congressional action on the Commission's recommendations. Together, we can realize a future in which we have a different experience of wildfire risk and resilience. The work of the Commission represents a path to that better future. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much for your testimony. Ms. Mooney.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, we appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission's report to Congress and the Department of the Interior's ongoing efforts to address the Commission's recommendations. Thank you for your leadership in establishing the Commission with its collaborative approach to addressing federal wildland fire management policy. I'm grateful for my fellow co-chair designees, Commission members, subject matter experts, and others who contributed to this report. The wildfire crisis, as we know, is urgent, severe, and far-reaching. Climate change is leading to increasingly intense and destructive wildfires that profoundly impact our natural landscapes, communities, and public health. Reminders of the immediate need to address this crisis are all too frequent, from the recent fires in Texas and Hawaii to the smoky skies experienced last summer. The Commission produced 2 consensus-based reports for Congress, the first on the nation's aviation equipment strategy, and the second provided comprehensive recommendations for our wildfire systems. Interior fully supports the Commission's recommendations. There is significant alignment between those recommendations and the President's 25 budget. The Aviation Equipment Strategy Report includes 19 recommendations on the nation's aviation needs through 2030. Interior continues to examine the potential of adapting contracting terms to address aircraft availability, cost savings, and industry preferences. We support expanded use of uncrewed aerial systems or drones, which provide considerable strategic and safety benefits to our wildland firefighters. Our 25 budget request includes increases for additional procurement and staff. The final report centers on several interrelated themes that unite the recommendations and represent a generational shift in wildland fire management. None of these recommendations can be completed by a single entity and need to be addressed collectively by all the partners. The first and second themes urge new approaches by shifting towards more comprehensive systems and structures, better addressing the interrelationships between communities and landscapes, and facilitating collaborative efforts. These are the foundation for the actions Interior is taking to advance the recommendations. The third and fourth themes encourage a shift from a more reactive to proactive management and dramatically increasing the use of beneficial fire. Interior is leveraging bill funding to increase the pace and scale of fuels management and treatments and rehabilitation of lands damaged by wildfires. Last year, we increased our hazardous fuel treatments by approximately 30%. In November, Interior signed a memorandum of understanding with the USDA, Environmental Protection Agency, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to protect communities from the impacts of wildfire smoke while promoting prescribed fire, a major step forward towards greater coordination and collaboration among agencies. Tribes are well positioned to coordinate and implement the increased use of beneficial fire. Interior continues to work with tribal nations to promote co-stewardship of federal lands and invest in building tribal capacity. The fifth, and perhaps the most important theme, highlights the needs of our workforce. To improve recruitment and retention, the President's 2025 budget includes funding for new firefighter hires and requests increases for firefighter pay, a joint mental health program, and housing. It also includes legislative proposals that were in last year's budget that include establishment of a base salary table for wildland firefighters and a new premium pay category. The sixth theme stresses the importance of modernizing tools for informed decision-making across all phases of fire. The Joint Fire Science Program is supporting efforts to identify and prioritize science and technology gaps to strategically accelerate adoption of new technologies. The seventh theme stresses the urgency of treating the wildfire crisis like the national emergency that it is. The recommendations emphasize the need for increased, sustained, and predictable funding that keeps pace with the escalating crisis and incentivize investments. Collectively, these recommendations serve as a strategic roadmap to guide our efforts in reducing wildfire risk. We appreciate your continued support in addressing critical wildland fire mitigation and management issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Mr. Desautels.
Good morning, Chair Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. I'm Cody Desautels, and I'm the Executive Director for the Colville Tribe in Washington State. I also serve on the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, representing forestry and industry. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you today about the commission. We have felt the impacts of wildfire acutely at Colville. Since 2015, the Colville Tribe has seen more than 700,000 acres of our 1.4 million acre reservation burn, which includes a loss of approximately $500 million worth of timber. Would have been worth more 2 years ago when you got the quote. In response to wildfire-related challenges like these, Congress established the Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission, which was charged with undertaking a comprehensive review of the wildland fire system. The two commission reports are cross-cutting, expansive, and take a holistic approach to addressing the challenges we collectively face with respect to wildfire through its 167 recommendations. Today, I will focus my comments on 3 specific areas of the Commission's recommendations: wood products, tribal authorities, and wildfire response, including aviation. Wood products. The wood processing industry is a critical tool to help accomplish forest management goals and reduce wildfire risk. Inconsistent wood supply from federal land, along with wildfire losses, are threatening the ability to maintain existing wood processing facilities and hindering the needed investments to rebuild new infrastructure. The Commission included a recommendation for long-term federal investment and commitment to address landscape-level treatment across all boundaries where the highest risk exists. Congress must also incentivize the adoption of new technologies and processing systems to produce value-added and innovative wood products. The Commission identified a number of existing grant programs as areas for potential support. The Commission recognized the need to support these innovations from the initial pilot phase through commercial application. Congress should also commission a GAO review of existing programs and authorities that enable or inhibit cross-boundary work. New or modified authorities will be needed to achieve our goals. Tribal authorities. Coordination and consultation with tribes is an important first step in co-management. Congress should reinforce federal agency requirements for coordination with tribes. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act requires the Secretary of Agriculture to coordinate land use plans in the National Forest System with those of Indian tribes by considering site-specific tribal forest management, indigenous knowledge, and planning approaches. Other recommendations from the Commission include requiring the Bureau of Indian Affairs to acknowledge that federally recognized tribes may develop fire programs under approved tribal regulations and policies. And Congress should provide the U.S. Department of Agriculture standalone authorities to enter into co-management agreements with tribes that would allow the Forest Service to share decision-making authority with tribes for management of Forest Service programs or activities. Finally, many tribes are well-positioned and resourced to enter into co-management with federal agencies to reduce wildfire risk. However, additional support is needed for some tribes to support workforce capacity that enables beneficial fire practices. By providing federal agencies with the authority to partner and providing tribes with additional resources, Congress can bring new capacity to a system that has struggled to develop the necessary workforce. Indian tribes across the country stand ready to bring our indigenous knowledge and modern expertise to federal forest management. Wildfire response. A key theme of the recommendations for the wildfire response is improved collaboration between the various federal, state, tribal, and local entities that play a role in wildfire response. With respect to tribes, the Commission saw a need to recognize them as sovereign on the same footing as states. Any policy modification should make sure to advance parity and equity for tribes in compacting and funding processes. The Commission found that current wildland fire aviation strategy is based on a seasonal model which does not account for longer fire seasons and competing seasonal geographic needs that did not exist in the past. Use of new technology, including drones, also needs to be incorporated in strategies moving forward. To help develop a new strategy to meet the aviation needs through 2030, the Commission recommends Congress establish a task force composed of a cross-representative group of fire organizations to explore the feasibility of a regionalized approach to standards of cover. This would be a collaborative and inclusive process with all the impacted and relevant entities. The task force should consider costs and be open to exploring the trade-offs of different ownership models. The Commission was also charged with evaluating the use of Department of Defense surplus. We found that adoption of military surplus aircraft by agencies or private contractors carries risks and costs that are often overlooked, and the federal model is structured around contractors. Some states and contractors may choose to use surplus equipment, so it should be more readily available through a transparent process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. McDonald.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, I'm pleased to be invited to speak with you today to provide testimony regarding the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, on which I served. My name is Madeline McDonald, and I'm a watershed scientist at Denver Water, the oldest and largest water provider in the state of Colorado. On the commission, I served in the public utility industry seat. Specifically, I served on topical work groups focused on workforce, post-fire recovery, and public health and infrastructure, the last of which I co-led. At Denver Water, I manage the utility's wildfire preparedness programs. Denver Water has been experiencing the impacts of high-severity fire for over 25 years. The 1996 Buffalo Creek and 2002 Hayman wildfires collectively burned 150,000 acres directly above a Denver Water reservoir. Untreatable source water originating from these burn scars highlighted the vulnerability of our drinking water supplies to high-severity wildfire. Denver Water spent over $27 million recovering from these two wildfires alone. The Commission outlines a national strategy that recognizes the need for a comprehensive approach to wildfire management to address fires like the Buffalo Creek and Hayman fires. One key component of the Commission's comprehensive strategy is the need for proactive mitigation of wildfire risk in both the natural and built environments. Investing in pre-fire mitigation work is the only way to begin to break the expensive cycle of severe wildfire risk, damages, and loss. In the case of the Hayman fire, fire suppression cost the federal government over $42 million, and that's in 2002 dollars. Yet that figure represented only 19% of the total estimated economic impact. The Commission believes strongly that to reduce these overall costs and losses, Congress must invest in programs and approaches to mitigate risk of fire before it occurs. Fortunately, we have examples of successful programs of risk reduction in the natural environment, including the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program and the Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership. These programs should be continued and their authorizations expanded to more explicitly incentivize source water protection and post-fire preparedness. Even with our best mitigation efforts, fire will, and indeed should, still occur. Critically, it is important to note that in many landscapes, wildfire can contribute to healthy and functioning ecosystems and reduce the long-term risk of high-severity fires. It is not the presence of wildfire itself on the landscape that is the core issue. It is often the impacts of wildfire when fire burns at uncharacteristically high severity. High-severity fire can increase the risk of flooding and debris flows downstream of the burned area, placing critical values like water treatment infrastructure, road networks, utility infrastructure, and the built environment at risk. These impacts can extend for months or even years after a fire. To address these post-fire hazards, Congress should authorize and fund cross-jurisdictional assessments that consider downstream values at risk after a fire occurs. Restricting assessments of post-fire risk by jurisdictional boundaries limits our ability to mitigate or eliminate downstream costs and losses. In addition, creating dedicated funding for the Natural Resources Conservation Service Emergency Watershed Protection Program is another key congressional action that would enable quick, preventative response after a wildfire. Yet we do not have to wait until the post-fire period to begin to lessen its impacts. Planning for post-fire recovery represents a critical opportunity to reduce loss. The chaotic and time-critical nature of the post-fire period and the absence of pre-planning often results in a rush to restore to the baseline or pre-fire conditions. The opportunity to use recovery to build resilience to the next disturbance is then lost. Congress should direct agencies to review and modify existing programs that provide financial and technical assistance for planning to ensure that post-fire preparedness is an allowable and encouraged activity. In closing, I encourage members of this committee and Congress to act upon the recommendations of the Commission that this very body established. While the full recommendations of the Commission extend beyond the scope of this committee, members of this committee have critical roles to play in advancing work to help us reduce wildfire risk in the natural environment, harden critical infrastructure, proactively plan for wildfire recovery, and develop the comprehensive workforce we need to meet this challenge. Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee for this time and for your dedication to this issue.
Well, thanks so very much for your thoughtful testimony. Ms. Norris.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee for holding this hearing today and for the opportunity to testify on behalf of Wyoming State Forestry Division. My name is Kelly Norris, and I am the Wyoming State Forester and a member of the National Association of State Foresters. The Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission report stands out for its comprehensive assessment of the nation's wildfire management system. Today, I plan to address top 5 recommendations that would help state agencies drive significant change at a national level. I'm going to begin with recommendation number 47. This is about teamwork and being accessible for each other in our response. States, which can include local services, have access to a substantial wildfire suppression resources that can be quickly mobilized through our regional and state-to-state forest fire compacts. Compacts are set up for quick response to call for help, and with more efficient mobilization of resources, the overall federal cost for fire suppression can be significantly reduced. Modernizing and decreasing the number of compacts could greatly improve the availability of state resources across the United States. Moving on to recommendation number 55. This is making sure we are effectively funding the fire workforce at all levels. The utilization of the state fire assistance and volunteer fire assistance programs are essential to maintaining and building wildland mitigation and management capacity. We need to continue to fund these wildfire risk reduction and protection programs as they have proved to be an investment that pays dividends. Attacking wildfires when they are small is key to reducing fatalities, loss of homes, and other critical infrastructure and resources, which also reduces the federal firefighting costs. Less than 2 weeks ago, on March 1st, the Happy Jack Fire started just west of Cheyenne and made a run directly east over 8 miles into the city of Cheyenne, with hundreds of homes, F.E. Warren Air Force Base, and a significantly historic arboretum being threatened and evacuated. Many of the local city, county, and state resources that provided the immediate response that stopped the wildfire would not be operational without the use of the state fire assistance and volunteer fire assistance programs. The need to increase funding for fire suppression on federal lands has broad support. the need to increase fire suppression on state and private lands is just as urgent. There are two additional recommendations I'd like to call attention to, which are number 24 and 25. Wildfire risk doesn't stop at fence lines, and neither should mitigation funding. Treating landscapes at high risk for wildfire in and around communities holistically, regardless of jurisdictional boundaries, is a better strategy to reducing wildfire risk. The U.S. Forest Service is looking to partners like Wyoming State Forestry Division to help the agency reach its wildfire crisis strategy goals of treating 30 million acres of non-national forest lands. Increasing the flexibility of federal funds to move across boundaries is a way to get that agency and its partners to achieve this goal. State agencies are thankful to Congress for recently expanding the Good Neighbor Authority to U.S. Park Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as recommendation number 26 suggests. The Good Neighbor Authority program is a highly effective program that should be supported and expanded to accomplish more work faster. Wyoming has invested significant resources in the Good Neighbor Authority program because we know addressing the wildfire crisis requires long-term active management on all lands. State Forestry just recently was given authority through Wyoming's legislature through House Bill 43 to double the amount of Good Neighbor Authority positions, helping to increase the management necessary on our federal forests. State agencies support making all aspects of the authority permanent because we need consistency and predictability to continue to grow our Good Neighbor Authority programs. America's federally managed forests face serious threats. Wyoming and many other states are very concerned at how the national level old growth initiative could contradict the U.S. Forest Service's wildfire crisis strategy. With wildfire being the #1 cause in the loss of old growth forests, it is imperative that the U.S. Forest Service continues to prioritize wildfire crisis. Keeping laser focused on addressing the wildfire crisis will result in the agency being much farther along in protecting, maintaining, and recruiting old growth forests. To conclude, wildland fire response and management is one of the most challenging facets of my job as a state forester. Implementing the recommendations I highlighted today will immediately increase the efficiencies and effectiveness in tackling the wildfire crisis. State agencies need to be a part of the implementation to these recommendations. And lastly, we must stay focused on the urgent need to actively manage the fuels within our forests across all ownerships.
Well, thanks so very much for the testimony from all of you. Let me start with questions. Ms. Harrell, if I could, the Biden administration has called for a threefold increase in forest management and restoration projects in order to confront the wildfire crisis. The administration is pursuing a top-down, Washington-driven, old-growth forest management policy. Could you explain how this, I believe, restrictive old-growth policy is going to actually help the department confront the wildfire crisis?
And one of the earliest uses of our emergency authority was to protect giant sequoias from high severity fire risk. That's why the scoping notice for the amendment calls for proactive stewardship, which would include the ability to treat these stands for that risk, as well as regionally informed and geographically informed adaptive management strategies to reflect risk on the ground.
Ms. Rose, can I ask you to comment on what she had said? I mean, here I understand the sequoias, but in terms of just the overall policy of the old growth effort.
Thank you, Senator. As a forester, protecting, maintaining, and recruiting old growth is important. And in order to do so, we have to continue to actively manage our forests. Wildfire is the leading cause of loss of old growth, and it is a threat to forests of all ages, across all ownerships, which is why we must stay focused on continuing to address that wildfire crisis, as it will directly benefit all of our forests for the long term.
So you talked a little bit, Ms. Norris, about the Good Neighbor Authority and how that's been successful as a tool for the Wyoming State Forestry Division. So the last 8 years, when the U.S. Forest Service launched the program, Wyoming has treated, I think, 11,000 acres of federal land in the state, 6,600 acres of timber forest, 30 million board feet for local Wyoming sawmills. How vital is Good Neighbor Authority in Wyoming, and what makes the state such an effective partner?
Thank you, Senator. The Good Neighbor Authority program is extremely important to Wyoming, as 85% of our forested lands in Wyoming are federally owned. A great example of how Good Neighbor Authority can be such a tool in our toolbox is in 2023, Wyoming, Region 4, all of the timber sales that were sold out of Region 4 in Wyoming were G&A state timber sales. One of the reasons I think we are so effective in the work that we're doing through G&A is the fact that our contracting systems and our administration are flexible and adaptable to help get more management done on the ground. And I would like to thank you, Senator Barrasso, for your vision and leadership in this G&A program.
Okay, let the record reflect vision and leadership. Thanks. Thanks. Appreciate it. Ms. Harrell, the commission acknowledged that the Forest Service and the Department of Interior need to support the forest products sector. Currently, we face a dire situation for the timber industry near the Black Hills National Forest, fewer sawmills, escalating threat of catastrophic wildfires. So what happens to a national forest when you lose a local sawmill? And then how quickly does the cost per acre for treatment increase as a result of that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The wood products industry is essential to being able to realize the vision of increasing pace and scale of treatments as described in the wildfire crisis strategy. And both the wildfire crisis strategy and the commission report recognize that importance, and the commission included recommendations to invest in flexibility, in facilities, and other wood innovation and other support for the industry.
So do you agree the Forest Service needs to retain, at the very least, its existing private sector partners in the timber industry?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Ms. Norris, anything you'd like to comment on this?
Thank you, Senator. I have to agree. The timber industry is a very critical partner in getting more work done on the ground to reduce wildfire risk. And if we lose a mill in Wyoming, that's going to mean an economic loss, a loss in treated acres, and continued challenges of wildfire risk and forest health in those forests. Wyoming State Forestry has been working closely with the Bear Lodge Ranger District through our G&A program, helping to build their capacity and supporting them through the projects they are working on the Wyoming side. In particular, we're doing recently NEPA contracting for assessments to just move projects faster forward. Thank you.
And final question. Ms. Harrell, recent years, Congress has provided the Forest Service and the Department of Interior billions of additional taxpayer dollars for wildfire mitigation efforts. We've heard this from both sides of the aisle in previous hearings. Despite all of the money, we have yet to really see a significant increase in the number of acres treated, which has been a concern about all this. With all these resources, how is it that the timber outputs remain below 2018 levels?
Infrastructure law and IRA, we are putting those dollars to good use. Last year, the Forest Service had the most number of acres treated, 4.4 million acres in the agency's history, and we will continue to work to invest those dollars and to be able to treat acres wisely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm sorry I had to go to another meeting, but I wanted to get a few questions in, and we want to keep continuing. This is a very, very good discussion. Scientists have increasingly seen that forest ecosystems simply do not recover from these severe wildfires without human intervention. Instead, they convert into shrubland. Hazardous trees remain on landscape for far past the point where they could be harvested for value. I've said this many times. I was out at Yellowstone when they horrendous fires and could not believe that we had not harvested those trees as they're going to rot there. Has any consideration been given to allowing timbering to come in after a devastating fire to harvest the best that we can to it so the new growth will come back in a quicker, better way? And this is to all witnesses. Whoever wants to speak up, please do. You start. Mrs. Keller.
Thank you, Senator. I can speak on behalf of what we see in Wyoming. When we do have wildfires, we work pretty quickly, especially, for example, in the Black Hills, we had a fire that occurred, and we moved very quickly with our G&A program to turn around and be able to salvage that timber because it was ponderosa pine. It has a very short life time for us to salvage that
Did it
wood.
help for regrowth too?
Yes, absolutely.
Anybody else? Yes, sir. Mr. Cody.
Yes. Colville also has a very aggressive post-fire restoration strategy that includes salvage logging, to the extent that a local newspaper took a picture of a logging truck hauling smoking logs into the mill at one point a few years back. So we recognize it as a tool to help put those.
Does the Department of Interior stop you from doing it? They always told me they were not allowed to do this, or they did not get permits to do it. Couldn't go into a freshly, let's say within 6 months to a year after a forest fire. is Interior still taking that position?
At Colville, at least, the BIA superintendent has signed off on these through expedited NEPA processes. Those exercises are done ahead of time in our forest management plan, so we know fire salvage will be a component of our forest management, and so we evaluate those impacts ahead of time.
Ms. Mooney, about from the departments, are you all stopping them from getting in quicker?
I will have to take that and take a look at
Okay, anybody else? Because I think it's extremely important. It really is. It's just a waste of a good resource. Let me go to another question, I can tell. Ms. Mooney, can you describe where the Department of Interior is in implementing Congress's directive to provide straightforward regulations for trimming hazardous trees and transmission lines in right-of-ways? We know the damage and things happen. Fires happen because of it. We have outages because of it, because no one maintains it, or they have a hard time getting permission to maintain it. So if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. This is a high priority for all of our bureaus, for the departments, and me. The commission recommendations emphasize proactive investments to reduce risks. We look forward to continuing to work with the utilities and others to make government more effective and efficient, and this is a priority for me. Thank you.
Let me go to, I think, Mr. Cody, I'll go to you. The commission also examined the ways that Forest Service and DOI use aircraft for wildfire detection, suppression, firefighting, transport, or even igniting prescribed fires. So can you discuss the process the commission took to try to get a baseline understanding on the uses effectiveness of fire aviation?
So it was a struggle, I will admit. There's a lot of data that's tough to interpret because we have incident management teams that order more than they need to or don't place orders sometimes because they don't think they'll get the order filled. So we tried to look at the existing infrastructure, how it had been used successfully in wildfire suppression, and what the needs were for things outside of suppression, like fuels, treatments, and otherwise.
Did the commission come to an understanding or a unanimous decision on this?
The unanimous decision was we needed more data that was reliable, and that we would look at a standards of cover approach to what the air fleet should look like, both across all jurisdictions, really, state, private, and federal.
One final thing I wanted to ask you all. I was always concerned because I talked to someone who's they were a large harvester in BLM lands, and they were telling us that, you know, they're out working in the forest, and they'll see a lightning strike and a fire start. But they were, by law, unable to go in there and try to fight that fire before it got to the point to where, you know, the firefighters and the government got involved. They could have maybe suppressed it or contained it better, but they were unable to do that. Has that changed at all, the process? The only thing I use is, I know in the coal mining business, we had every mine had to have a rescue team because we knew if we could get into the mine and try to rescue a miner, we could save their life quicker than waiting for the rescue teams to come in 6 hours or 24 hours later. And I use that same concept in thinking, boy, if you have every fire or every timbering outfit that bids on contracts for harvesting in BLM lands, they should be required to have a firefighting unit trained to go in rapid response. Was that discussed at all?
Yes, it was. There are some liability challenges with that if you have untrained personnel responding.
No, you'd have to have a certified crew. The training, continuing training. We're trying to get that done because I think it would really cut down on these fires getting out of hand as quickly as they do. And no, anybody else have any comment? Ms. McDonald, do you have anything?
Yeah, I have nothing to add for the certifications, but just a point of emphasis in the commission's report is the use of beneficial fire. And so in some areas, when that natural ignition occurs, if it is burning at a lower or moderate intensity under the correct the weather conditions, the commission does encourage the use of beneficial fire where possible.
Ms. Norris, have you seen anything in your?
Thank you, Chairman. If that fire is occurring on state or private lands, we are expecting that to step up and put it out. We do not have beneficial fire authorities, nor do we agree to that. So with that being said, I am not sure what that means on federal lands, but typically many of those loggers do carry quite a few pieces of equipment to help in support, but are required to call it in.
Senator Daines, thank you.
Chair Manchin, thank you. For the past decade, the Forest Service and the Department of the Interior have moved from talking about fire seasons now to fire years. Wildfires are starting earlier, they're ending later, and are larger, they're hotter, and they're more devastating than what we've seen in the past. Fuel loads on our public lands are at all-time highs. Needed on the ground timber harvests and thinning work has been stalled by litigation, leaving our forests very vulnerable to wildfire. Drought, insects, disease have turned these overstocked forests into tinder boxes that are just waiting to burn. In the summertime in Montana, when we have these longer fire seasons, it's quite common when we have visitors that come to our great state in the summer, I have to show them pictures of the mountains because you can't see them because of the skies filled with smoke. The Forest Service 10-year wildfire crisis strategy aims to treat 50 million acres of federal, state, and private lands, but this is only a start to the critical management work that we need done over 100 million acres of federal lands alone that are at elevated risk of catastrophic wildfires. This risk is highlighted by the wildfires currently burning across the southern part of our country. To date, 1.4 million acres have burned. The 10-year average in this same time frame is just over 185,000 acres burned, so we're already seeing nearly 10 times the average destruction. The devastating Smokehouse Creek fire in Texas is the largest in the state's history and is over 1 million acres. High winds fueled its growth, and at peak spread, it was consuming 2 football fields of ground a second. Deputy Undersecretary Harrell, in the Commission's aviation report, 2 recommendations focus on firefighting aircraft contracts that are no longer fulfilling baseline operational demands to cover the extended nature of fire seasons. How many air tankers were on contract the day the Smokehouse Creek fire broke out in Texas?
Thank you, Senator. What I can tell you is that we were able to deploy aircraft to help.
How many were on contract the day that broke
I'll
out?
have to follow up and get you that specific number, Senator.
Do you know what it is?
I don't.
How long after the fire was detected did retardant or water drops start on the fire?
Again, I don't know the specific time. I do know that we were able to deploy over 200 fire personnel to help the response.
Yeah, there's an old saying in firefighting, it's a lot easier to put them out when they're small and the rapid response. A finding in the aviation report indicated that aircraft contracts favor short-term expediency over long-term value, which is concerning when you look back to the Blue Ribbon Panel on Federal Aerial Firefighting was established following several fatal air tanker crashes in 2002. What is the agency doing to prioritize best value in their contracting?
Resources as best possible. The Commission did highlight the need to be able to look at contracts and in the light of the fact that we have fire years, and made recommendations for a task force on that topic.
Deputy Secretary Harrell, many of the recommendations in the final On Fire Commission report center around increasing active management and encouraging collaborative approaches to forestry. In Montana, these forest projects are essential. They're essential to forest health, and these are being halted by litigation. You know, a healthy forest is a carbon sink. A burning forest is a carbon emitter. If Congress does not fix the Ninth Circuit Cottonwood decision on forest plans that have zero on-the-ground impact on species, how will this impact active forest management work to mitigate wildfire risk?
Senator, we agree. We absolutely want to be able to implement land management plans in a timely way. And we have been working with our sister agencies on a path forward that addresses cottonwood and protects wildlife, and would be happy to follow up with your staff.
Do you think we should resolve the and get this cottonwood fix passed by Congress and signed by the President?
I think there's a path forward that
Do you think we should do it? I mean, you're in the front lines of all this.
I would be happy to follow up with your staff on
So that's
the
a- that's a- that's-
recommendations.
So what do you think? You're a professional, you see it. Should we pass it or not?
We do not have an administrative position on that legislation, but we have been working closely with our sister agencies on a path forward.
Well,
and
the
would
good
be
news
happy to
is this
follow up.
committee now has passed it. So we've seen bipartisan support here as one of the fixes we need here to more effectively manage our forests. Thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say, this hasn't always been the case, but I've seen more collaboration amongst the agencies when it comes to wildfire, and this commission is a great start. Thank you. I have to also point out to the chairman, he may not know this, just last year, we opened our first sawmill in Carson City. It is a collaboration with the Forest Service, thank you so much, but the Tahoe Forest Products and Washoe Tribe of Nevada. And it's going to have a major impact on wildfire management in that area between California and Nevada, if you know where Tahoe is, which is key for us. And literally, because of the Caldor fire, which we all know was horrific in that area, this sawmill is now taking the wood from that fire and creating a local market for green and burned logs as well. So it is going to be key to our fire management in that area. That sawmill is the first that's opened in centuries in this area. So I thank you for that collaboration. It's key for Nevada and Northern Nevada and California. But let me jump to a housing issue, which we've touched on but really haven't focused on. I know the appropriations package that we passed last week extended the firefighter salary. Thank you very much. I think it needs to be permanent, and we should be working on that. But here's what I know. I was just with our firefighters, both in Reno, looking at urban interface wildfires, as well as in our forest, in Lamoille Canyon. And one of the things I heard from our incredibly courageous firefighters is the challenge to retain them because of a lack of salary, a lack of benefits, but housing. Housing is also an issue for so many of our firefighters, and I'd hate to say that we're losing them to this noble profession because we don't have housing for them. So I guess my question for Secretary Harrell is what are the solutions? What should we be focusing on to address the housing needs as well for our firefighters?
It's incredibly important for our workforce. We know the impacts that lack of available and affordable housing has for our ability to retain, recruit, and have the comprehensive workforce we need, and it's a strain on our employees. The commission made a number of specific recommendations, including recommendation 102, that would highlight the ability to provide support for our workforce, to help pay for housing, to be able to invest in housing facilities, to be able to waive fair market value, to be able to create partnerships with local community housing partners, and a number of other really important changes that will help address this challenge for our employees.
I appreciate that. And for my colleagues, thank you so much. I know we all have housing issues in our community, but this is one area where we're talking about housing for firefighters, but it's housing for our workforce in general. And we have other committees, from the Senate Finance Committee to the Banking and Housing Committee that I'm getting ready to go to now to talk about necessary housing. So this really is a comprehensive issue that impacts so many in our communities, as you can see, touching on just this very committee and the issues we're facing. So I'm hopeful we come together as Congress to pass bipartisan housing legislation that will benefit our firefighters as well. I thank you, and thank you all for the incredible work. I know our state forester was on the commission as well, Casey. Casey, she's fantastic. She's somebody that I talk with amongst all of our firefighters to really address these issues. And I will say a lot of the work and legislation I have is based on my conversations with all our firefighters, and they really echo what you have in the recommendations. So thank you for your great work. One final area I just want to touch on is, and it's the same issue, how do we address the salary and keeping it permanent? And let's talk more. It's not just salary, it's benefits, right? It's hazard pay. It's so many things that we deal with because now we're having wildfire seasons that are happening all season long, and they're hotter, and we need that workforce. What else should we be thinking about in Congress to support and keep and retain that workforce? And I guess either Ms. Harrell or Ms. Mooney, I'm going to talk to both of you.
Absolutely. We need to be able to pay our wildland firefighters what they deserve. Those pay increases need to be permanent, and we appreciate the action to extend the supplemental pay and look forward to working together to make those pay increases permanent. And our employees need the benefits that will ensure their long-term well-being, including retirement, including housing, including physical and mental health investments. The commission made a number of recommendations along those lines, and they're incredibly important.
Thank you.
No, just we're in full alignment on this for a permanent fix to the pay situation, and also housing is huge. We have to make sure that we attend to all the needs. Health and well-being, USDA and Department of Interior have a program going funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law. Our workforce, it is mission first, people always, and that's the way we think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I am going to submit just one question to our federal partners here from the Tahoe utility partners regarding water needs and for water suppression. Thank you.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Ms. Harrell, if I could start with you, I want to come back to the topic of the old growth forests and the new National Forest Management Plan that Senator Barrasso was talking with you about a little bit ago. As you probably know, hopefully, my state is home to the Mark Twain National Forest, which encompasses about 1.5 million acres in the state of Missouri. We're very proud of that. It's an important part of our state's natural resources. Let me just ask you, what will this new management plan mean for the Mark Twain National Forest? How many acres will be banned or restricted from logging?
Thank you, Senator. So the proposed action just had a scoping notice, and we just received public comments, so we are examining those public comments. However, I would like to highlight that the intent of the old growth strategy is to enable proactive stewardship in order to be able to ensure that old growth conditions can be present on the landscape, and that very much reflects the fact that wildfire is one of the most significant risks to those conditions.
So will there be any restrictions on logging in the Mark Twain National Forest as a result of the plan?
Well, the scoping notice in general calls for proactive stewardship, which does not prohibit harvest in old growth stands. It is intended for ecological restoration purposes.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, because this, as you may imagine, this is a subject of considerable interest to farmers and others in my state. The Missouri Farm Bureau has written you a letter on this subject, so I just want to be clear. Your testimony is there's not going to be any bans or restrictions on logging, any new ones in the Mark Twain National Forest.
The proposed action highlights the need for proactive stewardship for ecological purposes. So
yeah, I'm hearing you say that phrase, but can we just get down to, I'm asking you, I don't know what that means, and neither does any farmer in my state. So will there be bans or limits on logging in the Mark Twain National Forest as a result of this plan?
there would not be bans or limits on logging for ecological purposes.
Okay, so would there be any new limits on logging or timber harvesting in the Mark Twain National Forest as a result of this new management plan?
I'll have to get back to you specifically about the Mark Twain National Forest, but the policy is still being developed. But what the policy currently describes is the need for proactive stewardship for ecological purposes, which includes timber harvest.
Well, my understanding is the plan bans logging in areas of national forests that are classified as old growth forests, limits logging in areas that are classified as mature. The Missouri Farm Bureau, as I mentioned, wrote you a letter in February, actually, of last year with concerns about the proposal. Have you responded to them?
I will have to get back to you on the status of the response.
Well, what they're concerned about is the decline in timber harvest revenues and what that will do to public schools in the Mark Twain region that we depend on in the state of Missouri. They're concerned about the number of forest acres that will be banned from logging. They're concerned about the ability to adequately manage the threat of wildfires in the forest under this rule. So what's your response to all of those concerns?
The response is that we will still be able to manage those areas for risks that are present in the forest.
So we're not going to see a decline in revenues for public schools as a result of this plan?
Senator, I'll have to get back to you on the specific response to the question.
Okay, I would appreciate it, and I'd appreciate a response to their concerns. As I said, they wrote you over a year ago. This is a very significant concern to my state. I mean, the Missouri Department of Agriculture estimates that the forest products industry contributes $10 billion to the economy of Missouri, $10 billion, and supports 46,000 jobs. That's a lot of jobs in my state. That's a lot of working people. And a lot of people depend on the public schools in the Mark Twain region that are funded by timber harvest revenues. So I want to make sure kids go to school, that our schools stay open. I want to make sure that we don't lose jobs. I don't want any jobs lost, particularly not 46,000 jobs. I don't want to see revenues from my state go down. I don't want to see the state of Missouri get left behind because of some new plan by your administration. Does that make sense? Okay, so you're going to get me responses. You're going to respond to the Farm Bureau's letter and copy me in, and then you're going to get me responses about the effect on revenues for public schools, the number of acres that will be banned or restricted from logging, and the ability to manage wildfire threats. Yes? All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator. And now we have Senator Heinrich.
Ms. Harrell, I'm going to try to put some of what you said about the old growth strategy in English, and I want you to respond as to whether I'm off base here. The old growth strategy is not about a ban. It's about how we manage to create the conditions that lead to more old growth fire-resistant stands in our forest. So in the example you gave of the sequoia example, it was about removing small diameter trees and ladder fuels so that those older, more mature, carbon sequestering, habitat producing, fire-resistant trees could actually be more resilient in the face of fire. Is that why we're doing this?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Harrell, I want to talk a little bit about the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire in northern New Mexico. One of the things my constituents have really struggled to navigate is just the sort of maze of emergency response or recovery programs when USDA and DOI and FEMA and all these agencies try to work together. And I kind of wish FEMA was here today because they're such a big part of that, and they're struggling. I'll be very blunt. They are struggling to become a fire response management agency. They do storms well. They don't do fires well yet. But how can we better coordinate the federal response and the recovery work for these communities, the landowners, the businesses who are impacted by these catastrophic wildfires?
Thank you, Senator. I first want to recognize the impacts of the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire to communities in your state. It is really important that we make it easier for communities to navigate all of the different programs involved with post-fire recovery. The Wildfire Resilience Interagency Working Group is working right now to make it easier on the federal side to coordinate and access those programs, and the Commission similarly made recommendations to that effect. I know we are working closely with the state to provide resources and with FEMA to provide resources to communities in New Mexico.
We've got a long way to go, but we look forward to working with you on that. I think we've done a good job getting the funding in place. We need the funding to flow to the folks on the ground. Ms. Mooney, the Commission strongly, and you've reiterated, super support for permanent pay increases for wildland firefighters. We made an incremental step towards that in the Interior Appropriations bills last week, but that expires in October, and so it needs clearly to be permanent. I want you to talk a little bit about how the uncertainty, the non-permanence of that, impacts your department's ability to recruit and retain fire personnel. It seems to be a big bottleneck.
Yeah, there's no question that it impacts our ability to recruit and retain personnel. Everyone's looking for certainty, and we need that stable, sustained funding over time. We share the concerns about this pay cliff. The specter of it will return in '25 without congressional action and only reinforces the fears that wildland firefighters currently have about our support and our commitment to their careers that are needed. So only a permanent fix can take care of that. And we urge Congress to authorize permanent comprehensive reform. Thank you.
Yeah, we need to send a clear signal to those firefighters. And I would just urge all of my colleagues, like, this is something we need to get done once and for all. The Office of Personnel Management, and this is for you again, Ms. Harrell, published revised classification standards for new wildland firefighter occupational series in June of 2022. The Forest Service and Department of Interior were supposed to have implemented that new series by June 2023, almost a year ago. DOI has begun posting openings using their new position descriptions. Why is the Forest Service not there yet?
Thank you, Senator. We are continuing to work to implement this series, and we have a significant firefighter workforce. We really want to ensure employee and union engagement on implementation so that we can get it right. So we're currently working to complete classification of the positions, and our goal is to begin advertising this year.
Great. Ms. McDonald, did you mention the Emergency Watershed Protection Program?
That's correct.
Can you talk about a little bit about how we fund that? Because we kind of fund it as an as-needed basis, usually in an emergency supplemental package. How would you like to see that funded?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. The Commission recommends sustained and dedicated funding to the Emergency Watershed Protection Program so that communities are able to apply for that funding. We also recommend using, or the ability to use that funding across boundaries, that cross-jurisdictional, cross-boundary approach that the Commission recommends. We'd like to see that extend into the EWP program as well. And that dedicated funding will enable communities to act quickly in the post-fire phase.
I would love to see that as well, because, Chairman, that was a program that the entire New Mexico delegation had to fight to fund immediately after Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon instead of being able to draw from it as events were taking place.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. We worked pretty hard, I think, in the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. I'm the ranking member on that. And I think we recognize the situation that we are in with our wildland fires and firefighting capacity, putting $6.1 billion in wildland fighting for both DOI and Forest Service. That's a $480 million increase. I think that expresses that priority. I agree. We need to be figuring this out because we can't have this looming cliff. But I do think it was important that we were able to avoid that 50%, basically that 50% cut in salaries. That's not a very good incentive. That doesn't give certainty to the folks that they need. But it was a tough budget year. It's going to be harder in 25. I think you know that. But one way that we can try to knit this all together using the resources that we're working on here, but I think it is to better utilize our industry partners and their workforce, their skills, their experience, and leverage that to make our wildland, our federal interventions on wildland firefighting more efficient, more economical. So a couple questions for both Ms. Harrell and Mooney. You submitted your annual budgets to the Hill yesterday. I'm asking you, what is the most important budgetary item to address wildland fires that was not included in your budget request? I know what's in your budget request. I don't want you to reiterate that. I know that there's more. Can you please share? And please don't tell me that you're going to get back with me on it. These are important issues. Nobody's going to hold it against you if you say, we weren't able to get this one on the table. We're trying to figure out what other tools in our toolbox we need here and help us prioritize. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just start. The Commission's recommendations came out at the end of September after following our budget submission.
Right.
And we do have language in there requesting, we've made some requests related to the Commission's report and findings, but certainly we have outlined.
Can you give me like what your top two priorities are from that recommendation, again, that were not anticipated at the time that you had to submit budget? submissions?
This is a comprehensive report. It's going to be an iterative process. I don't
not
want
helping
to
me prioritize
choose
here.
among those.
No,
so
no, I get it,
Give
but
some thought.
you got to help me. We are moving right now on FY '25, right? Like, as we speak. And so me and my team can kind of root through this and figure out what we might think is most important. But that's why we bring you here, to give us some direction as to what this commission and your agencies believe could be the most effective tool going forward. We've got your budget requests, but as you've noted, that came out before the recommendations from this commission. So in my view, time's a wasting, and I don't want to miss the mark here. Ms. Harrell, can you give me anything more concrete?
Yes, Senator, thank you. The FY25 budget request is in alignment with the Commission's recommendations. The Commission recommended an interrelated set of recommendations, and including significant investment at the scale needed for being able to work across all of the areas in the Commission's report. It included some really important recommendations around workforce investments and benefits. It also included recommendations around authorities for being able to deploy funds more effectively across landscapes to be able to meet needs where they are and to be able to work with partners.
So within that, what role do you feel that our timber industry partners play? Again, we can dump more federal money, but you've got partners out there as part of the community that can help you with some of this, whether it's on the thinning side, dealing with some of the fuel that is out there. Where does that fit in what you're talking about here?
That fits squarely in the Commission's work. Partnerships and being able to collaborate in a multi-jurisdictional way were at the heart of the Commission's recommendations, and there are a number of recommendations to improve authorities.
And do you think that your proposed rule on the old growth harvest is going to have any impact on our industry partners, on their availability to remain as these assets as you're working to reduce wildland fires?
The old growth strategy, again, is about what remains on the landscape and how we get there. And our timber industry partners are going to be very much a necessary part of how we achieve resilience across the landscape.
Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time, but I would like to follow up, both in my capacity here on the authorizing committee, but also in my capacity as an appropriator in this space. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Rono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony. Ms. Mooney, it's good to see you, as always. I am looking at some of your recommendations of the commission, and I note your recommendation number 1, although I understand that you're not necessarily prioritizing these recommendations, but your number 1 recommendation here is Congress should establish a community wildfire risk reduction program. So experiencing the horrendous wildfire of Maui and the family of federal agencies, as I described them, were present, and that involves a lot of agencies, and at this point, over 1,000 federal employees have been involved and engaged in the efforts to remedy the situation. So I'm just wondering why in this first recommendation that there aren't the other agencies that are also involved in what needs to happen after wildfires. I'm thinking of the EPA, DOD, DOT, SBA. Any particular reason that those agencies are not included in the first recommendation? Anybody?
Thank you, Senator. The recommendation for the Community Wildfire Risk Reduction Program was really important to the Commission. The agencies that were identified there, I think, were intended just to be the sort of steering committee, but very much understanding and appreciating that there will be a larger role for more agencies than those identified specifically in the recommendation.
So the recommendation is that Congress should establish such an interagency group, why can't an interagency group be established some other way? Does it require congressional action?
A number of the elements in that recommendation would require congressional action to better enable investments in the built environment and increase ignition resistance.
I think that it is very clear that after a wildfire, there are a lot of people involved in helping us to address all of the issues. So I would be very interested to know what kind of congressional action specifically would be needed. One of your other recommendations, and this is for all of the witnesses, the native seed restoration. Hawaii has lost 70% of its native forest within the past century. And however, we have found in Maui there is not enough native seeds available to adequately to regenerate the burned landscape. So this is something that is a need, not just in Hawaii, but I would say probably in other states. So what can we do to enable states to be able to restore their landscape with native seeds? And in fact, I do have a bill that would establish a national interagency seed and restoration center, and I'm wondering if that would be helpful. Any of you want to respond to the need for native seeds?
I can
Ms. Mooney?
start with that. Thank you, Senator. It's important to use native seeds in restoration efforts. A lot of the, and as you know, in Maui, we had the invasive species across that helped fuel the fire. So we're working on that as well. But work expanding the availability of those locally adapted native seeds and seedlings that accelerate the recovery of burned areas is in the early phases, but will result in accelerated fire recovery. Two federal efforts in Hawaii, Alaska, the Great Basin, Mojave Deserts, and the recovery of the iconic sequoias. We know it's important not only to complete these vegetation management activities, but maintain them, and we put priority on that, and we would be delighted to continue working with you on your technical assistance for your legislation.
Thank you. Ms. Harrell, you've been asked about the firefighting aircraft that's available. So in your report, the aviation report, the state of Hawaii and U.S. Pacific territories have a very limited supply of aircraft with firefighting capabilities. Do you know how many aircraft the U.S. Forest Service currently has in Hawaii and the U.S. Pacific territories with firefighting capabilities? And are you considering increasing that number?
I'll have to get back to you, Senator. We don't currently have a national forest in Hawaii, but we work very closely across with a number of partners on deploying aviation assets, and we'll get back to you with a specific response.
Yes, even if there are no national forests in Hawaii, though, I take it that you have some aircraft with firefighting capabilities in Hawaii, or not?
I'll have to get back to you, Senator. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Since there are no national forests in Hawaii, I am running out of time, but I wanted to ask each of you, and perhaps you can respond to me later in writing. What can states like Hawaii that do not have a federal presence, what suggestions do you have for the state, counties, and private sector to be much more aware of what they can do to reduce and mitigate wildfires? So can you respond to that? And Ms. Mooney, you look as though you're
sorry.
You have something to say right now.
One of the benefits of being part of both the Commission and the Wildland Fire Leadership Council, we have worked together on a cohesive strategy to address the needs across all levels of government. So we look forward to working with the state of Hawaii. One of the big pluses that the chairman had mentioned earlier on is collaboration and consensus building was key to this commission. And so we look forward to working with your state to make sure that you have what the state has what it needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clear that these kinds of natural disasters are occurring just about in every state, and that the recovery efforts takes time and a lot of resources. For Hawaii, $1 billion has been committed, but we know that that is not going to be enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hoven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Harrell, as you know, innovative solutions like the Joint Chiefs Program at USDA, a partnership between the Forest Service and the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, help support forest and grassland restoration projects across public and private lands. Along with Senator Bennett, I've worked to enact legislation based off our Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership Act, which authorizes and provides enhanced resources to the partnership. Do you support the Commission's recommendation to authorize and fund post-fire preparedness and recovery efforts under the Joint Chiefs Program?
Yes, Senator. The Joint Chiefs Program is incredibly important.
For the grasslands, which are in my state and other states throughout the Midwest and West, obviously forest fires are a serious issue. Will you commit to work closely and coordinate with the ranchers who are on those grasslands and make their living ranching on the grasslands?
Yes, Senator.
For both Secretary Harrell and Secretary Mooney, obviously one of the things that is creating bigger and more forest fires is the amount of fuel out in the forests and in the grasslands and other areas. And there's general agreement that we have to be proactive in managing that fuel load. Do you agree that we should be proactive in addressing forest and grassland health, and what immediate steps are your respective agencies taking to address that specific challenge, fuel load?
I can start. Yes, we agree that we need to be able to accomplish fuels treatments at increased pace and scale. That's at the heart of the Forest Service's wildfire crisis strategy. This last year, we were able to treat 4.4 million acres, which is an agency record. The Commission highlights the importance of being able to build on the investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act and allow us to be able to do more at the scale and pace we need.
And at the Department of Interior, we believe that more tools help us reduce risk. Reporting acreage for us it's an important quantifier of the workload, fuels reduction work needed, planned, and accomplished. An improvement in reporting metrics would be to augment acre reporting with more information on outcomes, and that's what we're focused here. Interior's treatment goal for this year is 2 million acres, which is 30% above last year.
For both of you, do you agree that grazing activities are an effective management tool? Grazing activities are an effective management tool and contribute to reducing wildfire risk. Secretary Harrell.
Yes, Senator, grazing activities can be an effective fuels management technique, and the Commission included recommendations on that effect.
Exactly, and you agree with those recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you. Secretary Mooney?
Agree as well, and we're fully aligned.
And what steps are each of you taking to empower grazing in line with the Commission's recommendations?
I think one of the things to highlight is that the Commission focused on the need to be able to work across jurisdictional boundaries and work in partnerships with private landowners, including working landowners.
That goes right to my first two questions. I'm so glad that you emphasized that. Maybe you did it on purpose, but if you did, it was great.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, it's at the heart of the recommendations and at the heart of how the Forest Service is approaching this work. We need to be able to work across jurisdictional boundaries. We need to be able to work with states, with tribes, with local communities, and with many other partners, including working landowners.
That was such a great answer. I should stop right there because you just like nailed it. You know, that was perfect 10 or whatever. But I do have to ask, the last question for both of you is under the NEPA, you know, when we reacted some of the reforms to NEPA in various legislation, we tried to get at these delays, in some cases 5 to 7 years for these environmental reviews. And that's holding up action that we've just been talking about that you all need to take. And, you know, we tried to get an EIS down to, I think it was 2 years and an EA down to 1 year. And we've got to find a way to compress that evaluation cycle so we can get more affirmative action like we're talking about in terms of, you know, addressing these challenges with the wildfires. So what are you doing to get down to that reasonable time frame for EIS, maybe 2 years, like we've tried to do in legislation, and 1 year on the EA for each of you?
Thank you, Senator. One of the things we're doing is investing resources we received through the bipartisan infrastructure law in standing up regional planning service groups to be able to help increase efficiency. And we're also really working to think about how we can staff interdisciplinary teams and invest in the training needed to do planning effectively.
Clearly, you can be more effective if you can get after these challenges quicker, right, Secretary?
At Interior, we're committed to improving our NEPA efforts and the timeframes that it takes us at Interior to complete these reviews. The department recognizes the importance of wildfire risk reduction projects and the need to start and finish them quickly. We're making sure that we have the staff and resources in place to more effectively coordinate this and be even more responsive to local needs and concerns.
I think both the chairman and the esteemed senator from Maine who are here with me would agree that getting at these things quicker will make you more effective. Of course, they were both, well, all three, Hickenlooper too, they were all governors, so
You are too.
yeah, they're, you know, I have great respect for their wisdom. Thank you.
We got all governors here right now.
One
We have a
former
quorum.
governor's worth 6 ordinary senators.
Oh, Senator Angus King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to talk about the issue of firefighters, because we're in danger of losing our firefighting force. And imagine your house catches on fire and you call the fire department, nobody answers the phone. I get thousands of communications in my office. I got a letter in the last couple of weeks, and I want to read portions of it because I think it really outlines this problem. This is from a Wildlands firefighter. I have stood in poor people's backyards with the words, "We don't have insurance," of the homeowner ringing in my ears as my crew is in a fistfight with Mother Nature trying to hold our line. I've worked until every cell in my body screams to quit. My legs feel like jelly, and I get that 1,000-mile stare into nothing, and then work another 14 hours. Exhaustion does not even describe it. We have, each and every firefighter across the West and in the United States as a whole, quickly accepted two realities. You work this job long enough and one of your friends will die, or you will have a close call yourself. Regardless of it all, the American Federal Firefighting Force is the most capable, most committed, and toughest in the world. They are ferocious in their commitment, capable in their execution, accepting the possibility of an unspeakably painful death from hazards across the board every time they walk out the door. I know that you know of our pay and benefits issues, but what I'm not sure you know is how many of us are hanging on by the very tips of our fingers. There is great remorse spoken between the firefighters on a hill you've never heard of eating cold MREs as they bat around the idea of how much more they can take. Some speak quietly to their saw partner about how they are being evicted and don't have anywhere else to go. Others stare off and say this will have to be their last season. A majority curse the politicians in Washington. The latter so much so that in Montana we were asked to write out a last will and testament, and we all wrote in, quote, "Don't let any politician stand over my casket and preach false hope of change." This was written as gallows humor, but it's a joke that's all too true to us. The stakes are that as the experienced firefighters are drummed out, we don't have depth to replace them. I fear that if things don't change, we will deplete one of the nation's great resources. Suddenly, there will be an uptick in crew fatalities and in hours, and whole cities will be turned into a moonscape. Many will ask, bewildered across the nation and in congressional hearings, what happened, but we know, and I think you do too. That's what we're talking about here. This isn't just typical, let's have a raise. This is about maintaining one of the great assets, as he says, that this country has, and we're in danger of losing that asset. So we've got to understand what these folks are up against. Most of us, when we sign up to do our jobs, we're just going to do their job. These people, when they put their name on the line, are literally putting their lives on the line for the rest of the country. So, Ms. Harrell and Ms. Mooney, we've got to address this, and we've got to address it in a thoughtful way. I know we've got budget difficulties, but the alternative of what we're putting these people through and what we're subjecting to the public to, if there's nobody there to answer the call, is unthinkable. So I hope that you'll work with us, the administration will work with us to really find a satisfactory solution that amply rewards these people in proportion to the benefit that they're bestowing upon the country. I want to now turn to a question. In 1986, something like 13 billion board feet were harvested on federal land. Last year it was like 2.6 billion. I believe that in addition to climate change, one of the things that's contributing to forest fires is a lack of cutting, is a lack of pre-commercial thinning, a lack of cleaning out the forest and the forest floor. Ms. Norris, by the way, one of my best friends in Maine is Sue Bell, who was the first female state forester in the country in the 1980s. I want you to know that you're standing on the shoulders of some pretty great people. But my sense is that a lack of clearing the forest is contributing to forest fire risk. Is that true?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, that is true. Our forests are dense and they're full of fuel. And because of that, yes, that adds to our wildfire crisis.
And one of the environmental groups, national environmental groups, educated me that a growing tree sequesters more carbon than a mature tree. And I would say, I don't know about other states, in Maine, there's more trees, there's more woods in Maine today than there was in 1846 when Henry David Thoreau climbed Mount Katahdin. The forests have actually expanded, but if we don't cut, we're actually diminishing the carbon sequestration and we're increasing the fire damage. Is that true?
Yes, and when you do harvest that timber and put it into tables,
it's sequestered.
It is.
That's right.
Unlike when we have a fire and it burns and gives off carbon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Hickenlooper.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank all of you for being here. Appreciate the distance and the time involved in coming to these meetings. But this is something that is, to certainly this committee, very close to our heart. Just because I'm always in favor of the home crowd, let me start with Ms. McDonald first. It's always great to have a Coloradan testifying before the committee, especially someone from Denver Water, which I know so well. Denver Water has a 5-person board appointed by the mayor with no approval process. So the mayor gets to really set a direction for not just the city of Denver, but for the state and how we deal with some of these issues. And we've been facing not just wildfires, but really mega fires, like many of the western states, Cameron Peak, Pine Gulch, troublesome. I can give you a whole list of fires. And these are, you could say these are two harsh reminders of climate change and the way we are seeing dramatic changes in precipitation patterns. So Ms. McDonald, as a watershed scientist, can you just describe a little bit of what the impact of the mega fires is on water supply first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Senator. High severity impacts water supplies through every phase, through source water collection, through the treatment of that water, and then the distribution of that potable water supplies out to our communities. Typically, the greatest impacts to our water supplies actually happens after the fire occurs. When you have any rainfall or snow melt that falls on this fresh burn scar, it's going to mobilize all of that newly loose sediment, ash, and debris. In the west, that's carried downstream and typically deposited in a drinking water reservoir, which can cause a couple of things. It reduces our storage capacity in those reservoirs. It can clog our conveyance infrastructure and create operational challenges. But maybe most relevantly, it creates significant water quality degradation when that water interacts with the sediment and the ash, which can make it challenging or at times even impossible to treat that water.
Right, absolutely. And then the other thing is, we know that the Colorado River's future reservoir operation is certainly top of mind for many Westerners, more and more nationally now. Why should forest health be up there on an equal level?
Yeah, absolutely. The commission had robust discussion around this, and one of the findings of the commission was with the increasing demand for water resources across the nation, protecting our existing supplies that we have from the threat of wildfire is critical. I think it's even more so in the Colorado River Basin, like you said. And most of the discussions, as you mentioned, are really around the demand side, the quantity side. And we neglect sometimes the water quality side, the supply side of the Colorado River discussions. Improving the resiliency of forest health gives us a double benefit. Forests can be our first natural filter of that water supply if they're in healthy, functioning ecosystems, or they can expose that water supply to the contaminants that lead to water quality concerns if there's a burn scar in that landscape.
Exactly, and we ignore that as its own peril, and as the diminishing capacity of the reservoir, as you alluded to earlier, or described earlier, is that, you know, those two go together. It's such an obvious, the cost benefit for the investment is you get so much more benefit. Mr. Distol, if I get it's close. A name like Hickenlooper, I'm used to mispronouncing people's words. And then Ms. Norris, I'll ask you the same question. You know, if you go to the whole gamut from removing the removal of hazardous fuel on federal lands to providing the native seedlings for the post-fire recovery, this is all about partnerships, right? Between the federal agencies, between states, the tribes. You know, this collaboration is critical for addressing the issues you're all here discussing. So can you guys talk a little bit about the unique expertise and capabilities that tribes and states bring to the table when it comes to prevention, response, and then, you know, recovery?
So I think when you look at partners, a lot of times they have strengths that the federal government doesn't have, or we have flexibilities that they don't. So we serve as a testing ground for approaches that aren't typically seen on federal land. So if we can really look across landscapes, across boundaries, to apply what really pre-fire treatment should look like to create resiliency on the landscape, that's best handled through a very collaborative approach with lots of perspectives in the room where there's been successes and failures that we can learn from as a group collectively.
Right.
Thank you, Senator. I believe states can really bring out an aspect when we're talking about specifically fuels mitigation, cross-boundary project work, where that interconnection between private landowners and states, as well as our federal partners. We communicate to both the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, and we bring everybody together in the room and say, this is where we're going to work on this headwaters of the Colorado together. We're going to even work with our other state partners and do a collaborative project with Colorado and Wyoming, or South Dakota and Wyoming. And I think that's the key is interagency coordination, because it's what's best for our state.
Right. Well said, and totally appreciate. As all of us former governors that were up here recognize that the Governors Association collaborates at a level that very few other political denominations work on at that level. So we really appreciate it. If the chair will allow me to ask just one last question for the two of you and maybe for all of you, how can Congress, what should we be doing to build upon and make sure we get maximum benefit from those partnerships?
Well, if I could start, I think the one thing that we haven't mentioned today is really capacity, that a lot of our limitations are workforce related. So we see the huge investments that were made in the infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act, but with that huge huge addition of funding didn't come a huge addition of staffing. So we're really limited on the amount of work that we can do in any given time. So we really need to focus on how we consistently build that capacity through time to do this work at scale over decades, not just the next 5 years.
That's well said.
Thank you, Senator. For me, the number one priority is priority number 24, which is providing federal funds across boundaries. If we were able to utilize those funds in a way to increase our pace and scale on projects that would be on other lands outside of federal lands, we believe we can make a major difference.
Awesome. Anybody else, if I can indulge one, anybody else want to answer that question? Put a price in, what should Congress be doing? No.
I would just add really briefly, we have a number of recommendations related to access issues as well. Communities that can't access the federal funds because of match requirements, that they can't post the 25% match requirement, and funneling money to the collaboratives and cross-boundary landscapes as well. So the access recommendations could also be critical to that.
More flexibility. Got it. Anyway, thank you all.
Let me just, again, thank all of the witnesses for joining us this morning for the discussion. I think it was very informative, and as you can tell, we have an awful lot of interest, even though I'm from the eastern part of the country, and most of my Democrat colleagues and a lot of my Republican colleagues are from the western portion, where it's quite prevalent of the problems they face, and they don't anticipate. They know it's going to happen. They just how severe it's going to be. So we're all interested in trying to change the direction and how we prevent this from happening and spreading. And there's so much management, and when something catastrophic event such as that, there should be ways to harvest, there should be ways to replenish and try to prevent it from happening again. We're going to have, all the members will have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. If there's nothing else to come before the committee, we stand adjourned.